Okay. Hi, everyone. Today is Wednesday, October 9th, 2024. My name is Joy. I'm a recovered Al-Anon and will be leading this meeting. We want to welcome everyone to our Al-Anon Big Book Recovery meeting. This is a step speaker meeting that meets every Wednesday night at 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time or 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We will study the 12 steps by using the precise instructions out of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous as they relate to us as Al-Anons. Let's get our meeting started. This is the original AA preamble written by the AA Grapevine describing the fellowship in 1940. We study the preamble with an open mind and an open heart to consider how it applies to Al-Anon. This helps us to stay focused on the message of recovery the pioneers intended while observing the traditions and actions. Through the actions taken based on the instructions of the basic text, we comprehend what the pioneers meant when they described the membership of AA, which is that they worked a program of recovery and they no longer drank. And in our case, we no longer obsessed over the alcoholic. Through continuous action and study of these principles, the understanding of the value of the original preamble reveals itself. We ask for your humble consideration of our sincere admiration of the pioneers of Alcoholics Anonymous. The simple hope is that we of Al-Anon will grow into the same clarity and unity that birthed the original 12-step fellowship, because without them, after all, none of us would be here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and read the original AA preamble. So it says, we're gathered here because we are faced with the fact that we are powerless over alcohol and unable to do anything about it without the help of a power greater than ourselves. We feel that each person's religious views, if any, are his own affair. The simple purpose of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is to show what may be done to enlist the aid of a power greater than ourselves, regardless of what our individual conception of that power may be. In order to form a habit of depending upon and referring all we do to that power, we must first apply ourselves with some diligence. By often repeating these acts, they become habitual, and the help rendered becomes natural to us. We have come to know that as alcoholics, we suffer from a serious disease for which medicine has no cure. Our condition may be the result of an allergy, which makes us different from other people. It has never been permanently cured by any treatment with which we are familiar. The only relief we have to offer is absolute abstinence, the second meaning of AA. There are no dues or fees. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. Each member squares his debt by helping others to recover. An Alcoholics Anonymous member is an alcoholic who, through the application of and adherence to the AA program, has forsworn the use of any and all alcoholic beverages in any form. The moment he takes so much as one drop of beer, wine, spirits, or any other liquid containing alcohol, he automatically loses all status as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. AA is not interested in sobering up drunks who are not sincere in their desire to stay sober for all time. Not being reformers, we offer our experience only to those who want it. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and on which we can join in harmonious action. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our program. Those who do not recover are people who will not or simply cannot give themselves to this simple program. Now, you may like our program or you may not, but the simple fact remains that it works, and we believe is our only chance to recover. There is a vast amount of fun included in the AA fellowship. Some people might be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity, but just underneath there lies a deadly earnestness and a full realization that we must put first things first. And with each of us, the first thing is the solution to our alcoholic problem. To drink is to die. Faith must work 24 hours a day in and through us, or we perish. In order to set the tone for this meeting, I ask that we bow our heads in a few moments of silent prayer and meditation, followed by the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Thy will, not mine, be done. I wish to remind you that whatever is said at this meeting expresses our own individual opinion as of today and as of up to this moment. We do not speak for AA as a whole, and you are free to agree or disagree as you see fit. In fact, it is suggested that you pay no attention to anything which might not be reconciled with what is in the AA Big Book. If you don't have a Big Book, it is time you bought one. Read it, study it, live with it, follow the directions in it, and learn what it means to be an AA. And that's the end of the preamble. A sponsor is anyone who has had a psychic change as a result of working the steps and has the willingness to work with others. For those looking for a sponsor to guide them through the steps, please stay tuned and have your pens ready to record phone numbers immediately after the meeting. Each Al-Anon group ought to be a spiritual entity having but one primary purpose, that of carrying the message to the Al-Anon who still suffers. This is our primary spiritual aim. Our job as a group is to provide people with a place to learn about and work the steps. It has been our experience that working the steps consistently provides us with a better, saner life. We consider all else to be an outside issue. This includes personal problems. The proper venue for sharing such problems is with a sponsor. This is, after all, where real recovery takes place in working the steps with a sponsor. We are just so glad we're all here, and we're all here because we're not all there. And there will be a period of fellowship after the meeting. If you have questions, if you need a sponsor, if you need to check in or get current, or if you want to discuss other literature, please stick around for the fellowship. That would be a better time for these subjects. Okay, so this is the second week of the month, the second Wednesday of the month for the STEP speakers. So I'm going to be covering likely 4 through 6 today, maybe covering a little bit of 7 because this month has 5 Wednesdays on it. I'm hoping to cover a lot of Step 12 on that 5th Wednesday because I always feel like towards the end of these, I always never have enough time to kind of do enough time on Step 12. It kind of gets rushed just because it's at the end and I'm trying to always catch up. So that's kind of my plan. We'll see where we get today, but I'm going to start at Step 4, and I kind of started Step 4 a little bit last time. So I'm going to jump into the big book, and just to catch us up a little bit, what have we covered thus far? If you're new and you're listening to this, and up to this point in the book, so we kind of left off page 64, but up to this point, there was a lot of talk about Step 1, and they talk about the doctor's opinion. They talk about the allergy, of an alcoholic and what that means for them and how an alcoholic is bodily different than a normal drinker, and that this allergy, this phenomenon of craving happens for them, and it's something physical. It's not something as family members that we experience. We have a lot in common mentally with the alcoholic, but the physical allergy is something we don't have in common. And that when we talk about Step 1, we're powerless over alcohol and our lives have become unmanageable. That powerlessness, it breaks down into mind and body. And we're powerless. An alcoholic is powerless over their body because once they take that first drink, there's a loss of control that happens. They want the second drink more than the first, the third more than the second, and so on and so on. And it's a physical thing that happens. Now, they're powerless over their mind because they have a mind that doesn't have a choice anymore as to whether or not they're going to take that first drink. And so the unmanageability has to do with the unmanageability of the mind, and that there's a broken, they have a broken mind that will always take them back to that first drink. And something that we can also really relate to as family members, in that maybe we say that we're going to stay away from them and we're not going to control their drinking, or we're going to do this or we're going to do that. And, we can't stick to that resolve. We don't have a choice anymore. No matter how bad we want to leave them alone, we can't. We always start again. And so they cover this, the allergy again, doctor's opinion covers a lot of that through the writings and the theory of Dr. Silkworth, which was later on proven to be fact. And then they jump into Bill's story in chapter 1, and Bill's gonna really line it out for what does that look like, in his life. What did step 1 look like? How did the loss of control and the progression happen for him, and how did he get to a place where he wanted to stop and he couldn't stop, and how he had those things had to happen and come together as a step 1 experience. And then that's when all the magic happens. He meets Ebby Thatcher. He has a spiritual experience in Towns Hospital, and his life is forever changed, and he never drank again. He died sober. So we're learning through Bill's story too that if it can work for Bill, it can work for us. And then chapter 2, there's a solution. They're going to still cover quite a bit talking about step 1, talking about the loss of control that happens, and kind of all the methods that we have tried to control our, drinking for us, maybe things that we have tried to control our thinking and our obsession around the alcoholic person. And they also in that chapter start to dive into the mind aspect, where we see how are we like the alcoholic, and that we have this unmanageable mind that will take us back to wanting to control and manage them even though we don't want to. And then they jump into chapter 3, more about alcoholism. And the whole chapter is dedicated to the moment of insanity that precedes that first drink. And the same with us, the moment of insanity that precedes that first obsessive thought around this other person. They give a few 4 stories in that chapter. 3 of them are real and 1 of them isn't. And just really trying to drive home that we can see step 1, because the rest of the steps we can kind of, as long as we really kind of understand it and we're doing our best, we're going to make it work. Step 1 is something that really has to be felt at a gut level. And it's something that's experienced outside the rooms. It's not something where, I come to Al-Anon and I'm going to have this magical step 1 experience in the meetings. I mean, I don't know, maybe that happens for some people, but it was intended that the step 1 experience happens out there, outside of the rooms, us trying all kinds of things to try to fix this obsessive mind that we have and failing. So in chapter 4, once they've really driven home this step 1 stuff, they dedicate all of chapter 4, we agnostics, to step 2, which is really about willingness and about letting go of old ideas. And they use the word prejudice throughout that chapter several times, because they know that they knew that a lot of people were coming into this program with the God idea really stuck sideways, in their jaw, and that half of the original fellowship came in as agnostic. And it's a really great chapter to when we're working with prospects and new people, to kind of go over with them if they're having a tough time with this God stuff. And so then we also covered at the end of last week, we got into how it works, which is dedicated to steps 3 and 4. And in step 2, since we know that we're lacking power, we're powerless over our mind as Al-Anons, well, what are we going to do? We're going to have to get power, and that's through developing this idea of a higher power, this power greater than ourselves. So it does need to be something bigger than ourselves. So this idea that we can make a doorknob or higher power. I mean, they're real specific. It needs to be something bigger than us. But we're going to give our life over to that, and it doesn't mean we have to have it all figured out at that moment. Belief is just capitalizing on the experience of someone else. So if I'm having a hard time with the God stuff, can I believe that this worked for my sponsor? And can I be willing to follow directions here? And then step 3, we've had a step 1 experience. We're willing to kind of let God drive the ship. And then in step 3, we actually make a decision to let God drive the ship. And it's like, oh, this is where we give it to God. And those first 3 steps are just decision steps. They're not really asking us to do much. Now, when they start getting into the specific instructions of the 4th step, on page 64, they're going to tell us we're going to have to start writing some stuff down, because it's important that I look at this stuff, because if it's just up in my brain floating around, it's gone. So we need to look at it, and then they reference several times through the 4th step instructions that we're going to need to look back at the list, and we're actually going to need our inventory later on for our amends list as well. So, this idea that we need to burn our 4th step, and you don't want to do that. You kind of want to hang on to that because you are going to need it. So let me jump into where I left off last week. Let me find it. Because we are in how it works. I don't know why I thought we weren't. We are. Okay. So I'm just going to read some of this. So at the bottom of page 64, I think I covered some of these other paragraphs last time. But we start with, it says resentment is the number 1 offender. So when we go through an inventory, there's 3 inventories. There's resentment, there's fears, and there's the harms that we've caused with our sex conduct. And they first start with resentments. And Bill might have thought that it was easier for an alcoholic to look at the resentments than it was fears, because that fear stuff, he references it as a moral and corroding thread. And so this we're going to start with the people, basically, that it's not necessarily that we're angry with, but the people that kind of affected our way or got in the way of our way of living. And the word resentment itself, if you break it down into the Latin meaning, it means to refeel. So if we think about a resentment, that's the stuff, give an example, somebody makes me mad, they say something that I don't think they should have said, and in the moment, or they hurt me, they say something to me or do something to me that I don't like, they hurt me in that moment, and then I go home and I replay that feeling over and over and over again. And so this resentment stuff, where it's these things that we're constantly refeeling and replaying, even if it happened a long time ago. So it says it destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. So up to this point, they've covered. We know this is an illness of mind, body, spirit. Now, up to this point in the text, they've really been driving home the mind and the body aspect. They want us to understand what is it that's wrong with us. And this is where they start addressing the spiritual issue, is actually here in step 4, the spirit problem that we have. We're going to start seeing that there have been things that have been standing in the way of us getting in touch with this power. And we're going to look at here. It says when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. Again, the mental and physical part, the obsession of the mind, in referencing the alcoholic, the allergy of the body, it's going to get straightened out when we address the spirit problem. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. Again, it's important we're writing this down. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. So people, those are the people in your life. The institutions would be like, law enforcement, the IRS, the church, that type of stuff. Principles might be something like the 10 Commandments. Those are principles. The 12 steps are also principles. And then it says, so they're listing out how we're going to write this down. And so they've just covered column 1. We listed people, institutions, or principles with whom we were angry. And now they're going to tell us column 2, which is we asked ourselves why we were angry. So that's the cause. And then they're going to start talking here about column 3. In most cases, it was found that our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, our personal relationships, including sex, were hurt or threatened. So we were sore, we were burned up. And this, and Bill gives us a really great example on page 65, and you can just really see the simplicity of it. And it kind of goes back to what he talked about a few paragraphs ago, where he compares the inventory to a business inventory. And it's very simple. This isn't emotional writing. This is him just being, just writing exactly what it was, very short and sweet and to the point, because what he knew was if this is supposed to be a fact-finding and a fact-facing process, we're just writing down the facts. We're not going to get all emotional here in column 2 and write paragraphs and paragraphs, because the more that we write that stuff, the more that we're drifting, we're kind of refeeling that stuff again, and it's not useful. So, and then the column 3 stuff, we start kind of seeing, well, why was I upset about these things that person did to me? And it was because it might affect me financially. It might affect who I think my self-esteem, like who I am, or who I need to be as a person, or what makes me happy or sad. It affects my ambitions, my personal relationships that I have with other people. And it goes on to say on our grudge list, we set opposite each name our injuries. Was it self-esteem, our security, our ambitions, our personal or sexual relations which had been interfered with? And we were usually as definite as this example. And he uses, you see column 1 there. Now, when you're writing at a 4-step, you really want to, we're taught always that when we write, we're going to write left to right. But what happens when we do that is we kind of start, again, reliving some of these things. And so when we write our inventory, we're actually going to work up and down. So we've got our column 1, I'm resentful at, so that's the names of all the people, the institutions, or the principles. We're going to write all those out first. And then once we've done that, we're going to go back and we're going to write column 2, work on column 2, the cause. And again, very simple here. It's important that we write every cause, but if you notice, he's only using about 5 to 10 words per cause, really short and sweet. And after we finish column 2, we're going to move on to the parts of self that have been affected, that column 3 stuff, the sex relations. And so if we look over this example that Bill gives, while we're writing the 4th step, we're going to be learning some things. And we're going to be seeing how this parts of self stuff, the reason, and again, that these people, we're not really mad at them. We're mad at what they did to us. And we're not really The only reason we're upset at what they did to us is because of this column 3 stuff. It's because these core ambitions and these parts of, these core things, instincts that we're all made with are being affected. And that when we start writing this stuff, we start to see that we've really been just kind of living life in these first 3 columns here. And you can see fear is listed a lot in that 3rd column, along with self-esteem and how much at a deep level that this and how this affects us. So at the bottom of the page, bottom of 65, he says, we went back through our lives. So that means that we're going to start with the kind of the right now stuff, the right now resentments, and we're going to work all the way back to the beginning of our life with this resentment stuff. It says nothing counted but thoroughness and honesty. When we were finished, we considered it carefully. The first thing apparent was that this world and its people were often quite wrong. To conclude that others were wrong was as far as most of us got. The usual outcome was that people continued to wrong us and we stayed sore. And sometimes it was remorse and then we were sore at ourselves. So they do reference that we can be resentful at ourselves. We're usually not going to spend a lot of time on that, because it's real easy, even for alcoholics, family members, to kind of get into the self-pity place. But they do say it is appropriate to we can put ourselves in the resentment column. And so once we've got all this stuff written, they're going to say at the bottom of page 66, it says we turned back to the list for it held the key to the future. And we were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle, and we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, the wrongdoing of others, fancied or real, had power to actually kill. And this fancied or real stuff, so again, when I'm sitting down and I'm thinking about all these resentments and I'm reliving this stuff, my mind kind of starts making up stories a little bit where what that other person did to me was a little bit worse, and then what I did really wasn't that bad. That's kind of what we do. So this fancied stuff means some of the stuff we just make up in our heads a little bit about this, and then some of the stuff that's real. And it says, how could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. So they're referencing the 4th column here, which was, where's our wrong at here? And we might not see it while we're doing a 4th step. We might think, well, maybe I can see a little selfishness here, a little dishonesty here. But there's something that happens between the 3rd and the 4th column, and they're going to reference it here, that we're going to make part of this deal that we're making with this power is that we're going to look at these people differently. And it goes over it here in this next paragraph on the bottom of page 66. It says, this was our course. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. Though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, they, like ourselves, were sick too. And we asked God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. So we see the resentment prayer there. We see the, I believe it's the first 4-step prayer. I guess I'm not positive, but we're making this deal as we start to look at this 4th column stuff, and that's our wrong is the 4th column, that we're gonna look at these people different and look at them as sick people. And this prayer is a prayer is an action. I have to take the action of the prayer for it to do something. So that I'm going to turn this around, and even though I hate these people, some of these people I might hate to a deep, deep level. It tells me that I'm going to pray for them, and I got to be willing to pray for them, or else what's going to happen for me is that resentment will stay and I won't recover. I cannot recover if I'm not willing to work on this. Doesn't mean I have to feel great about it. I need to be willing to work on it. And so they give us some first steps here in this resentment prayer to take some action around what we're going to do for this person and to pray for them. And it says on page 67, referring to our list again, putting out of our minds the wrongs others had done, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. So now that you've got us all prepped for the fourth column, and they're asking us, where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened? And though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. And so this is something we've maybe never done before. And what happens is maybe we're not seeing this when we're writing the fourth step. A lot of this fourth column stuff is what we're going to be covering in a fifth step with a sponsor. But we might be looking at some of these people and some of these resentments and just seeing like, hey, I had a wrong here, that there was a wrong that occurred. And some of these, we start looking at some of these resentments and they just kind of look silly, because we start to see it maybe a little bit here when we're writing our fourth step. Okay. So once we get done with our resentment inventory, we're going to move into our fear inventory. And fear, so it's not like fear, we're not talking about physical fears, we're talking about fear to the level of that I'm afraid I'm going to lose something I have, or I'm not going to get something that I want. That's what we mean by fear. We're not talking about, really talking about physical fears. And he starts to say, notice the word fear is bracketed alongside the difficulties with Mr. Brown, Ms. Jones, the employer, and the wife. The short word somehow touches about every aspect of our lives. It was an evil and corroding thread. The fabric of our existence was shot through with it. And so sometimes we think fear ought to be classed with stealing. And that's because when we're in fear, we're really robbing the rest of the people in our life, because it's really hard to show up and be present for people when we're in fear. And it says we reviewed our fears thoroughly. We put them on paper, again, telling us that we need to put this stuff on paper, because if it's just up in our mind, it's gonna be gone. That's what happens. We put them on paper even though we had no resentment and connection with them. We asked ourselves why we had them. So they're referencing column 1. We put them, the resentment on paper, and then we asked ourselves why we had them. And what we start seeing through a fear inventory is that something in our sponsor is also going to help us, fifth step is what's happening. There's a lot of self-reliance going on when we're in fear. And it says, we never apologize to anyone for depending upon our Creator. We can laugh at those who think spirituality the way of weakness. Paradoxically, it's the way of strength. The verdict of the ages is that faith means courage. All men of faith have courage. They trust their God. We never apologize for God. Instead, we let Him demonstrate through us what He can do. And we ask Him to remove our fear and direct here's the fear prayer. We ask Him to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be, and at once we commence to outgrow fear. So as we're writing this list, it's, this is some stuff that can be really hard for us to look at, but what it mostly comes down to is that we're not trusting God here. And if we've made this decision in step 3 that God is now the new employer, not me, that we got to be willing to give this fear stuff to God and be willing to work on it. Now they're going to jump into the sex conduct inventory. And so it says now about sex. Many of us needed an overhauling there, but above all, we tried to be sensible on this question. It's so easy to get way off track. Here we find human opinions running to extremes, absurd extremes perhaps. And so they go into kind of that all kinds of people have different opinions about sex, and that we really don't want to get involved in this stuff. And it says we don't want to be the arbiter of anyone's sex conduct. We all have sex problems. We'd hardly be human if we didn't, and what can we do about them? So this inventory that we're looking about, it's not kind of like similar to the fear inventory. We're not looking for physical fears, and the same here in the sex harms inventory. They're not talking about the act of sex. This is really a relationship inventory, and what we're looking at is how have I treated the people that I've been in intimate relationships with? How have I treated God's kids, these people that I supposedly love? How did I leverage them and manipulate them with what God gave me? And so we're going to write this stuff down, and they talk about sorry, I'm just going to skip ahead. Let me where is this? Where I'm at the book. It talks about these indirect harms. Whom had we hurt? And did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? And so what they want us to look at is when we harm someone with our sex harms, a lot of times it has a chain effect or chain reaction. I don't know if that's what I'm trying to say, but there's people that are, all kinds of people are hurt by this misuse of our sex powers. And so there's a lot of harm that we cause to people in our illness. And as Al-Anon, we're just as guilty as doing this thing as the alcoholic is. We maybe try to leverage people with sex by withholding sex, having affairs, that type of thing. That happens. So we're not always innocent here. And so when we start writing this stuff down, the idea is to see that we've harmed a lot of people with these sex powers. And the reason they want us to look at this is because this really, really harms people. This isn't just like a general harm where, hey, I'm just harming somebody at work over some, little small thing. This sex stuff gets very complicated, and it gets very, very messy. And they really wanted us to look at this stuff. And we're going to be willing. It says, in this way, we tried to shape a sane and sound ideal for our future sex life. We subjected each relation to this test. Was it selfish or not? And we asked God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. So this is the point where we see that even though we're looking over a whole list of these things, these harms that we've caused, we're going to see that it was pretty selfish. And that here they're giving us a prayer. And this is where we're going to ask God to help us work on these things, because we're not going to be perfect at it right off the bat. But it says we ask God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them. And we remembered always that our sex powers were God-given and therefore good. It goes on to say they're going to give us another prayer at the bottom of page 69. Whatever our ideal turns out to be, we must be willing to grow toward it. We must be willing to make amends where we have done harm, provided that we do not bring about still more harm in so doing. In other words, we treat sex as we would any other problems. In meditation, we ask God what we would do about each specific matter. The right answer will come if we want it. And they reference, this is actually the second time that they reference in the fourth step the amends process. And because it says we must be willing to make amends where we have done harm. So they're already prepping us. Even though we're on step 4, they're prepping us for step 9. And they're dropping hints. Because it's like, okay, you're doing this hard work of writing down, all this stuff, but you better get ready for the 9th step. And the reason for that is because they knew that the 9th step is a big deal in the matter of this is where a lot of the freedom comes, where we start to really get touched in or tapped into the power through the amends process. So they're getting us ready. on page 70, they kind of sum up a little more about the sex stuff, but they kind of start wrapping up the inventory here, and it says, if we have been thorough about our personal inventory, we have written down a lot, and we've listed and analyzed our resentments, and we have begun to comprehend their futility and fatality, and we have commenced to see their terrible destructiveness, and we have begun to learn tolerance, patience, and goodwill toward all men, even our enemies, for we look at them as sick people. So we're going to start seeing some truths for this 4-step process. And now we're going to get into the 5th step. So we have our list, and kind of at the beginning of Into Action, let me pull it up here. So we're in chapter 6. So this chapter is going to cover steps 5 through 11 into action. They spend a lot of time in the first few pages of into action kind of telling us who we're going to do our 5th step with. Because again, thinking of the context of when the book was originally written, they didn't have a lot of people working the program, and so they were mailing this book all over the place, at the time all over the United States, hoping somebody could read this book and be led to a spiritual experience that was going to relieve their alcoholism. And so they spend time here telling us if, hey, we don't have a sponsor, who can we find that'll listen to our, our inventory. It says, just jumping ahead a little bit because I'm kind of running out of time. Page 73, they start talking about kind of how we go into our inventory, or just talking about what's going to kind of happen here in step 5. It says having persevered with the rest of the program, they wondered why they fell. We think the reason is that they never completed their house cleaning. That's a reference to step 4. They took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. They only thought they had lost their egoism and fear. They only thought they had humbled themselves. But they had not learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense we find it necessary until they told someone else all their life story. And so they talk this reference to all their life story, and sometimes there can be some misunderstanding, and people will use the big book in a way where they're misunderstanding what's written here. This doesn't mean an inventory. I have to write pages and pages and pages and have everybody know all my life story, because not all my story, or most of my life, did not contribute to why I'm an Al-Anon and why I'm a chronic Al-Anon. So that's not what we want to see here. We're really looking for this important stuff that really we're having a hard time letting go. And they talk about, on page 73, it says, more than most people, the alcoholic leads a double life, or the Al-Anonic. He is very much the actor. To the outer world, he presents his stage character. This is the one he likes his fellows to see. He wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't deserve it. So this is us, whether we're obsessing over the alcoholic or not. We live this double life, and we're putting on a show for everyone. It says on the bottom of page 73 that we must be entirely honest with somebody if we expect to live long and happily in this world. So when we do a 5th step, it says we're going to get honest with somebody. We're not going to get honest with everybody. That's why we have a sponsor who knows us. That's why we're doing a 5th step with this person who knows us. That's why later on we're going to 10th step with this person, because they know us and they know our story. They're going to hear our 5th step. They know how to call us out on our crap because they know us. That's why we don't run around our group kind of trying to get the answer that we want, and that we take the hard things to the people that know us, or to the person that knows us. All right, I'm going to skip over to page 75. So they're going to tell us It says, when we decide who's to hear our story, which is our recovered sponsor, we waste no time. We have a written inventory, and we're prepared for a long talk. We explain to our partner what we are about to do and why we have to do it. He should realize that we are engaged upon a life and death errand. Most people approached in this way will be glad to help. They will be honored by our confidence. And then it says we pocket our pride and we go to it, illuminating every twist of cranny, every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. So that's how we're going to go into our fifth step, is setting aside our pride and being ready to bring to light these things that we never thought that we could tell somebody. And now they tell us what we're going to do, what should happen after our fifth step. It says once we have taken this step, which they mean the fifth step, it says withholding nothing. That means that I haven't, that's why at the end of a fifth step, a sponsor might ask, is there anything else? Is there anything you're holding on to? Is there anything you and I need to talk about before we end this thing? So it says withholding nothing, we are delighted. So they give us some promises here that should start to manifest, even right after a fifth step. And if they don't start to manifest, there is a problem. And likely a lot of times it goes back to honesty. And if we're not feeling some of these promises, then why weren't we honest? And it's most likely not because we didn't understand the fourth step or the fifth step or what we were doing. It's because we didn't think we had to be honest, which comes back down that I'm not really convinced that I need to be here. And have I truly had a step one experience? But these promises, so it says, we're delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have had certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly, and we feel we're on the broad highway walking hand in hand with the Spirit of the universe. And now they give us a very, very specific instruction before we move on, and this is the only place in the book that they tell us to pause between steps, is this hour of meditation after our fifth step. It says, returning home, we find a place where we can be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. So they want us to review our inventory. Again, we're not just going to trash it or burn it up. We need this inventory, so we're going to review it. And it says there's a prayer, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. And it says, taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. Carefully reading the first 5 proposals or the first 5 steps, we ask if we have omitted anything. So another prayer, we're going to ask God, and understanding that omission and forgetting are not the same thing, because there's going to be things that we forget. We're not going to we're not going to be able to remember everything that needs to be on our 4th step. Or everything, every person that we're resentful at. There's going to be things that come up that we forgot about. That's why we have a 10th step, that we can later deal with this stuff as it comes up if we did forget about it. They're talking about omission, which means I purposefully left it off because I'm scared to tell this other person. I don't want this other person to judge me. And so they ask, we need to make sure we're not omitting anything. And now it says because we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. So they're telling us at this point we are not free yet. We're building the arch to become free. And it's important that we're being honest here. And then they're just going to ask us basically 5 different ways, am I being honest? So it says, is our work solid so far? Are the stones properly in place? Have we skimped on the cement put into the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? And again, going back, we're not free yet. The real freedom of this program comes through the 9th step, amends. That's where the real freedom starts to take place here, is dealing with some of the guilt and remorse that we might have seen in the 5th step with our sponsor. So now, if we've taken our hour, for me, it was I took my hour and something came up, and I called my sponsor right away, because I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't tell her about this. Like I should have told her about this. Because something came up in that hour, where I was sitting with God, and I was like, I need to tell this other person because I'm building a foundation here to my recovery, and I don't want to, be glossing over something. So once I'm done with that fifth step and I've taken that hour and I feel like I'm building a solid foundation and I'm being honest, now it's going to get into steps 6 and 7 here. It's actually between page 76 and 77. They're going to cover 4 steps. And so at that first paragraph on the top of page 76, they're going to get into step 6. It says if we can answer to our satisfaction, we then look at step 6. We have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. And are we now ready to let God remove from us all the things which we have admitted are objectionable? Can he now take them all, every one? If we still cling to something we will not let go, we ask God to help us be willing. So if we break down this paragraph, again, this is step 6, so that we're going to be willing to have God remove our defects. So in a 5th step of the sponsor, we saw some truths about ourselves. We really kind of honed in on that 4th column stuff, which is our wrong, and our sponsor helps us see how a lot of all these resentments and these things that maybe it wasn't everybody else's fault. The resentment. Maybe I had a wrong here that set off it got the ball rolling into people to harm me. And so we learned through that 5th step that maybe people were just trying to do the best they could, and maybe this person hurt me because I hurt them. And so we saw these truths about ourselves. And it says, if we can answer to our satisfaction, that means, the prior hour, are we being honest? We then look at step 6 and we have emphasized willingness as being indispensable. And then are we now ready to let God remove things from us that we've admitted are objectionable? That's that column 4 stuff. We're going to be willing to look over that column 4 stuff and say, am I willing to let God have these things and to start working on them? It says if we still cling to something, we'll not let go. We ask God to help us be willing. So we don't have to feel all rosy about it. Maybe we aren't in a position where we've forgiven everybody off those lists, but we're going to ask God to help us be willing to work on it. And what happens here in 6 and 7 is we're really just kind of recommitting back to the program. We took a 3rd step prayer a while back, and where we decided that God was going to drive the ship. And so now, since we've seen these truths through a 5th step, we're recommitting here again in 6 and 7, saying, okay, God, I've seen these truths. I'm in whether the alcoholic recovers or whether they don't recover. I'm in. And so these are, this is the recommitment that we're saying, okay, I'm going to keep going. My deal, I'm still keeping my end of the bargain, which is that I'm going to keep working the steps. I'm going to keep listening to my sponsor, and I'm going to keep, once I recover, I'm going to help other family members. So, okay, I think I'm going to wrap up with that. And next week we'll start off right here on page 76 at step 7. Okay. So our 7th tradition states that every group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. This group does not have a payment structure in place and currently requires no overhead expenses. If you would like to fulfill 7th tradition, please direct contributions directly to the Al-Anon World Service Office by visiting alanon.org. For questions about this meeting, or if you are looking for a sponsor, please send emails to alanonbigbookrecovery@gmail.com. Recordings can be accessed on YouTube by searching at Al-Anon Step Speaker in the YouTube search box. If you're interested in other Al-Anon meetings that follow the Big Book, please visit www.alanonbigbooksolutiongroup.org. And now I'm going to read from page 164 in the Big Book. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who's still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order, but you obviously cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and for countless others. This is the great fact for us. Obey yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Now let's have a moment of silence for the Al-Anon who still suffers, followed by the Lord's Prayer or a prayer of your own choosing said in silence. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.